Cancel the meeting immediately. The words cut through the glass-walled conference room like a blade, freezing every executive in place as William Harrington, a billionaire known for closing billion-dollar deals before lunch, stared at a simple napkin lying on the table. No one spoke. No one moved, because just seconds earlier, this meeting had been on track to secure a $2 billion merger that would reshape two global corporations. At the center of it all stood Alicia Carter, a quiet black waitress moving between tables like she didn't exist. Her presence so subtle most executives had already forgotten she was even in the room. But William Harrington never forgot details. He had built his empire on them. Every number, every signature, every risk was calculated down to the smallest fraction. That was why people feared him. That was why people followed him. And that was why, when he picked up that napkin and read a single line written in ink, his entire system of certainty began to fracture. Alicia had not spoken loudly. She had not interrupted the meeting. She had simply seen something no one else did. A small inconsistency buried deep inside the financial projections spread across the table, invisible to executives celebrating too early. William's eyes narrowed as he reread the line she left behind, his mind racing faster than the conversation in the room. For the first time in years, he did not trust the numbers in front of him. He leaned slightly forward, his voice lower now, controlled but different. Run section 14 again. The room shifted instantly. Confusion replaced confidence. Executives exchanged uneasy glances as assistants scrambled for documents. Alicia stood still near the edge of the room, her hands folded, her expression unchanged, calm, invisible. But William was no longer looking at the deal the same way. Something was wrong, something no one else had seen. And in that silence, the balance of power began to tilt. The room did not breathe. It waited. Every executive seated around the long glass table could feel it now, the shift that no financial model had predicted and no briefing had prepared them for. William Harrington stood at the head of the table, his gaze locked on the stack of documents as assistants moved faster, flipping pages, verifying numbers, recalculating projections under growing pressure. The deal had been perfect on paper just minutes ago, structured, clean, and approved by every department that mattered. But perfection had a strange weakness. It only needed one missing detail to collapse. And now William had seen something that did not belong. Alicia Carter remained at the edge of the room, holding a tray she no longer needed to use, her posture unchanged, her expression calm in a way that made her almost invisible again. She was not supposed to matter in this room. She was not part of the negotiation, not part of the numbers, not part of the billion-dollar conversation happening in front of her. Yet she had written one line on a napkin, and that single line had changed everything. William did not speak for several seconds as he studied the updated report. His eyes moved slowly, line by line, as though searching for something he already feared he would find. The room around him grew tighter with silence. One of the executives finally attempted to break it, forcing a nervous smile while adjusting his tie. "Everything is aligned according to the final agreement," he said carefully, though his voice lacked confidence now. William did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached forward and turned the page back to section 14. Then again, and again. The numbers were there, but they were not what they were supposed to be. A structural imbalance hidden beneath layers of legal language and financial assumptions. A small adjustment in valuation that quietly shifted control of a key subsidiary without triggering immediate detection. It was subtle, almost invisible, but not to someone who built his entire life on recognizing patterns others missed. William leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening as realization settled in. This was not an error. It was design. A carefully hidden mechanism placed inside the agreement to transfer long-term leverage away from his side once signatures were complete. The kind of detail most people would never question until it was too late. His eyes lifted slowly from the document, and for the first time they landed directly on Alicia. She was still standing in the same place, unnoticed by most of the room, yet suddenly impossible for him to ignore. "How long have you known?" William asked quietly, his voice controlled but sharper than before. The room froze again, every executive turning slightly, confused by the direction of his attention. Alicia did not rush to answer. She simply met his gaze with steady calm. "Long enough to see it before it was signed," she said softly. That was all she offered. No explanación. No énfasis. Just truth delivered without effort. William exhaled slowly, looking back at the documents as if seeing the entire deal for the first time. The confidence that had filled this room earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet uncertainty spreading through every corner. And in that uncertainty, the meeting that was supposed to define a financial empire began to fall apart in silence. William Harrington did not speak immediately. The silence in the room had become heavier than any negotiation anyone had ever experienced. Around the table, executives shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances, waiting for the billionaire to either dismiss the concern or destroy the deal entirely. But William did neither. Instead, he stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the financial projections in front of him, as if the paper itself had betrayed him. Alicia Carter remained where she was, still holding the tray, still quiet, still unnoticed by most of the people in the room despite having just altered the course of a multi-billion-dollar agreement with a single sentence. She was not trying to be important. She was not trying to be seen. But William had already seen her differently now. Slowly, he closed the folder and placed both hands on the table. The sound was soft, but it cut through the tension instantly. "Everyone out except finance and legal," he said calmly. There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. Chairs scraped lightly as confused executives began gathering their things, leaving the room in controlled silence, unsure whether they had just witnessed a collapse or a correction. Within moments, the room was nearly empty. Only a handful of senior analysts remained, along with William and Alicia. The atmosphere shifted again, tighter now, more focused, as if the air itself had narrowed around the truth. William finally turned toward Alicia fully. For the first time since the meeting began, he was not looking at her as a background presence. He was looking at her as the variable he could not yet calculate. "Explain how you saw it," he said. Alicia hesitated only briefly, her voice steady but careful. "It was not hidden well," she said. "Not if you read the structure instead of the summary." One of the legal advisors frowned. "This went through 3 compliance reviews," he said quickly, defensive. Nothing irregular was flagged. Alicia did not react to the statement. She simply looked at the documents again, then back at William. "Because it was not written to trigger flags," she said. "It was written to shift control after approval, not before it." The room went silent again. William leaned slightly forward, his expression tightening, but not in anger. In focus. This was the moment everything changed. Not because of what had been discovered, but because of who had discovered it. A waitress. Someone who was never supposed to understand this level of structure. Yet she had seen through it faster than a team of analysts and attorneys combined. William studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke again, slower this time. "You are not supposed to be here," he said. Alicia met his gaze without hesitation. "I know," she replied. That answer should have ended the conversation. It did not. Instead, it deepened it. William looked back at the contract, then at the empty seats around the table, then finally at the napkin still lying where she had placed it earlier. A single line, a single warning, enough to stop a billion-dollar mistake before it was signed into reality. For the first time in years, William Harrington realized that control was not only about making decisions. Sometimes it was about recognizing when someone else had already seen further than you. The room remained sealed in a quiet tension that no one dared to break. Only a few people now sat around the long glass table, the remaining legal and financial advisors waiting for William Harrington to make a decision that would either revive or completely terminate a deal worth billions. The documents lay open, unchanged, but their meaning had already shifted. What once looked like precision now felt like uncertainty disguised as structure. William stood still at the head of the table, his focus no longer on the group but on the quiet presence near the edge of the room. Alicia Carter had not moved. She still held herself in the same calm posture, as if the storm of doubt and scrutiny swirling around her had nothing to do with her. Yet everything had started with her. One line, one observation, one correction that no one else had seen. A senior legal advisor finally broke the silence carefully. "Mr. Harrington, with respect, we cannot base a decision of this scale on an informal interpretation," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "The structure has been reviewed extensively." William did not look at him immediately. His eyes remained on Alicia. "Reviewed by who?" William asked calmly. "And with what assumptions?" The question hung in the air. The advisor hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Alicia finally spoke again, her voice steady but quiet, carrying no authority except the kind that comes from certainty. "The structure was reviewed as if control transfer would happen before execution," she said. "But it does not. It happens after approval triggers are activated. That changes everything." Another analyst shifted forward, flipping through pages rapidly, recalculating under pressure. The room began to react differently now, not with disbelief, but with urgency. Numbers that once aligned perfectly were no longer stable. Small inconsistencies widened when viewed through her interpretation. William finally pulled out a chair and sat down, his posture no longer commanding the room but absorbing it. For the first time in years, he was not leading a negotiation. He was evaluating a blind spot. "Where did you learn to see this level of structure?" he asked Alicia directly. The question was not accusatory. It was investigative. Alicia paused briefly before answering. "I did not finish formal studies," she said. "But patterns are the same everywhere if you know what to look for." That answer shifted something in the room. Not because it explained everything, but because it explained enough. William leaned back slightly, studying her more closely now. Not as a waitress, not as an outsider, but as something the system around him had failed to classify. A consultant quickly interjected, still uncomfortable. "Even if this interpretation is correct, we would need time to validate every clause," he said. William raised a hand slightly, stopping him. The motion was quiet, but absolute. The room went silent again. William turned back to Alicia. "If you are right," he said, "you just saved this company from losing control of a $2 billion structure." Alicia did not react to the scale of the statement. She only nodded slightly, as if confirming something simple rather than monumental. William looked down at the contract one more time, then slowly closed it. The decision was not dramatic. It was precise. "We are not signing today," he said. No one objected. No one could. As the remaining executives began gathering their materials in controlled confusion, William remained seated for a moment longer, watching Alicia as she prepared to step away again into invisibility. But something about that no longer felt acceptable to him. Not after what he had just seen. Not after realizing that the most important insight in the entire room had not come from the people he paid to see it. It had come from someone no one had intended to notice at all. The atmosphere in the conference room had changed completely, as if the air itself no longer belonged to the same moment that had begun the meeting. The executives who remained were no longer confident participants in a negotiation, but silent witnesses to something they were still trying to understand. The contract that had once represented certainty now sat closed on the table like a sealed warning. William Harrington remained seated, his hands resting lightly on the glass surface, his expression no longer sharp with control but steady with reflection. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about closing a deal. He was thinking about how close he had come to losing something without even knowing it. Alicia Carter stood near the edge of the room, still in the same position she had occupied since the beginning of the meeting, yet everything about how she was perceived had shifted. She was no longer background. She was no longer invisible. Even those who tried to avoid looking at her now found their attention drifting back, as if their understanding of the room had been quietly reorganized around her presence. William finally broke the silence, his voice lower than before, less formal, more direct. "You were serving tables this morning," he said, as if confirming a fact that no longer made sense in the context of what had just occurred. Alicia met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," she replied simply. There was no pride in her tone, no attempt to elevate the statement, only truth stated without adjustment. One of the remaining financial analysts shifted uncomfortably, as if the conversation itself was challenging the structure of the world they were used to operating in. William leaned forward slightly, studying her more carefully now, not as a participant in the meeting but as someone trying to understand an anomaly that had entered his system. And yet you understood what my entire team missed, he said. Alicia did not respond immediately. When she did, her answer was measured. I noticed what others did not have reason to question, she said. The simplicity of the statement made it more unsettling, not less. There was no arrogance in it, no attempt to diminish others, only an observation of process. William stood slowly, walking around the table until he was closer to her position. The distance between them now felt different, no longer defined by roles or hierarchy, but by awareness. People spend years in financial institutions and never see what you saw in minutes, he said. Alicia lowered her eyes briefly, then returned her gaze to him. Sometimes being outside the system makes the structure easier to see, she replied. That line settled into the room with quiet weight. No one interrupted. No one challenged it. William turned slightly, looking back at the closed contract on the table. The deal was no longer the center of attention. The assumption that had driven the entire negotiation had already been dismantled. He exhaled slowly, then spoke with a clarity that surprised even the remaining executives. This meeting is over, he said. There was no resistance. No debate. Only acceptance. As people began to leave the room, gathering documents and speaking in low voices, William remained still, watching Alicia as she prepared to step away again into anonymity. But something in him no longer allowed that to feel correct. He had spent his life identifying value in systems, in numbers, in structures designed to scale. And yet the most critical value he had encountered that day had walked in unnoticed, carried nothing but observation, and left every assumption in the room permanently altered. For the first time, William Harrington did not wonder what deal he had almost lost. He wondered who he had just been about to overlook. The conference room had already been emptied of most voices, yet the silence remained as if it refused to leave with them. William Harrington stood near the glass table, his eyes no longer on the documents, but on the space where certainty had once existed. Everything that morning had been designed for success, yet everything now felt redefined by a single correction that no one had anticipated. Alicia Carter remained near the exit of the room, her posture unchanged, her presence still understated, but no longer invisible. The shift was subtle but irreversible. People who had walked past her earlier without recognition now hesitated before doing so again, as if their perception had been permanently adjusted. William finally turned fully toward her, his expression no longer focused on the deal but on the person who had interrupted it without force, without authority, and without asking permission. Stay for a moment, he said. It was not a command. It was an invitation shaped by uncertainty. Alicia paused, then stepped slightly back into the room. The remaining assistants exchanged quiet glances before slowly exiting, leaving only the two of them in a space that now felt larger and quieter than before. William walked slowly around the table, as if organizing his thoughts through movement. Do you understand what just happened here? He asked. Alicia nodded slightly. The structure was corrected before execution, she said. William stopped walking. That was not the answer he expected. It was too precise, too detached, too calm. He studied her more closely now, not as an anomaly but as a pattern he could not yet categorize. Most people in this room do not see those corrections, he said. Alicia's expression did not change. Most people are not looking for them, she replied. The simplicity of her answer carried more weight than any technical explanation. William looked back at the table, then at the closed contract resting on it. A deal that had once represented expansion, control, and precision now represented something far more fragile. Assumption. He exhaled slowly, then spoke again. You could have ignored it, he said. You could have walked away and said nothing. Alicia lowered her gaze briefly, then answered without hesitation. Ignoring it would not have changed what was already there, she said. That line settled into the room like something heavier than words. William nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a truth that did not require agreement to be real. He moved closer to the table again, placing a hand on its surface. People spend years trying to reach this level of understanding, he said quietly. Most never do. Alicia did not respond. She did not need to. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was measured. William finally turned back toward her. "Why are you serving tables?" he asked, the question no longer carrying skepticism, but genuine curiosity. Alicia hesitated for the first time. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it changed the rhythm of the moment. "Because observation does not always come with opportunity," she said. William absorbed that answer without interruption. For a moment, the billionaire who controlled companies and negotiations across continents said nothing at all. Then he slowly nodded, as if accepting a reality that did not fit within his usual framework. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, the city continued its pace, unaware that inside, a single unexpected voice had already rewritten the direction of a decision worth billions. The room had grown quieter than any boardroom William Harrington could remember, not because people had left, but because something unspoken had taken their place. The weight of what had just happened no longer belonged to the contract or the numbers on the table, but to the quiet space between two people who now understood each other in a way the system around them did not. Alicia Carter stood near the edge of the room, her presence steady, her expression unchanged, as if the shift in power that had just occurred was not something she had caused, but something she had simply revealed. William remained where he was, his attention no longer divided between executives, reports, or projections. Everything had narrowed to a single point of focus. Her. He finally spoke, his voice lower than before, stripped of corporate distance. "You do not belong in a kitchen," he said. The words were not judgment. They were recognition. Alicia did not react immediately. When she did, her answer was calm. "Neither do most of the assumptions people make about me," she said. That sentence lingered in the air longer than anything else that had been said all day. William studied her in silence, as if trying to place her within a structure he could understand. But nothing about her fit into the categories he was used to. Not education, not position, not access, and yet she had done what entire departments had failed to do. He turned slightly, looking back at the table where the contract still lay closed. "If you had not spoken," he said slowly, "that deal would have gone through in under 10 minutes. Alicia nodded once. "Yes," she replied simply. There was no emotion in the confirmation, only clarity. William exhaled, then stepped closer to the table again, placing one hand lightly on its surface. "Do you understand what that means?" he asked. Alicia looked at him directly. "It means the structure was not secure," she said. William's jaw tightened slightly, not in frustration, but in realization. It was not just that she had seen the flaw. It was that she understood why it mattered. The silence between them shifted again, becoming something more focused, more deliberate. William finally spoke after a long pause. "Most people who work for me are experts in their field," he said. "They are selected, trained, and paid to see what others cannot." Alicia remained still. "And yet they did not see this," she replied. The statement was not delivered with superiority. It was delivered with fact. William nodded slowly, accepting the truth without resistance. He moved away from the table again, pacing once, then stopping near the glass wall that overlooked the city below. "I have built companies on the belief that intelligence scales," he said quietly. "That if I assemble enough of it, nothing gets missed." He turned back toward her. "But you were not part of that system." Alicia's expression remained steady. "No," she said, "I was not." That simple confirmation changed the tone of everything again. William looked at her for a long moment, then spoke with a level of certainty that had returned, but in a different form. "Then the system is incomplete," he said. "No one responded to that because no one else was there to respond." The room had become a space of private understanding between two people who had just seen the same failure from different sides. Alicia finally adjusted her grip on the tray she still carried, as if remembering where she was supposed to return to. William noticed the movement immediately. "Do not go back to the floor," he said. Alicia paused. The instruction was not harsh. It was final. William stepped forward slightly. "Not today," he added. For the first time, Alicia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not into surprise, but into awareness that something had changed beyond the meeting itself. Outside the glass, the city continued without interruption. Inside, a decision had already been made that had nothing to do with contracts anymore, and everything to do with a woman who had never been meant to be noticed at all. The decision in the room did not feel like a conclusion. It felt like the beginning of something that had no defined shape yet. William Harrington stood near the glass wall for several seconds without speaking, his reflection faintly visible against the city skyline stretching far beyond the conference room. Behind him, the table still held the remains of what had been a billion-dollar negotiation only an hour earlier, now reduced to closed folders and unfinished assumptions. Alicia Carter remained where she was, still holding the tray, still composed, but now standing in a space that no longer treated her as invisible. William finally turned back toward her. His voice was steady, but quieter than before. "You said you are not part of any system," he said. Alicia met his gaze without hesitation. "I said I am not seen by most systems," she replied. The correction landed precisely. William nodded once, absorbing it. There was a difference between absence and invisibility, and he understood it now. He walked back toward the table slowly, as if organizing his thoughts through movement. "I have people who analyze markets, risk, structure, compliance," he said. "They work across multiple layers, multiple countries, multiple models." He paused, then looked directly at her. "And still they missed what you saw in minutes." Alicia did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice remained calm. "Because they were trained to confirm structures," she said, "not question them after approval." William exhaled through his nose, acknowledging the truth in that statement. He gestured slightly toward the chair closest to him. "Sit," he said. It was not an order. It was an invitation shaped by necessity. Alicia hesitated for the first time, then slowly set the tray down and sat at the edge of the chair, still upright, still cautious, as if the room itself might reject the change in her position. William sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he finally asked, "What would you have done if I had signed it?" Alicia looked down briefly, then back up. "I would not have been able to stop it," she said. "Only to see it." The answer was honest, without exaggeration. William leaned back slightly, processing it. "Most people believe influence comes from position," he said. Alicia listened without interruption. "But you are saying it comes from observation." She nodded once. "Position allows action," she said. "Observation allows prevention." The distinction settled into the space between them. William looked toward the closed contract again, then back at her. "Do you realize what you are describing?" he said slowly. Alicia tilted her head slightly, waiting. "You are describing a level of awareness that entire institutions are built to achieve and fail to maintain." He paused. "And you acquired it serving tables." Alicia's expression did not change. "I acquired it by listening," she said. William studied her for a long moment. The weight of that answer was not in its simplicity, but in its implication. Listening, in her definition, was not passive. It was structural. It was active. It was selective. He stood again, walking once more toward the glass wall, looking out at the city as if recalibrating his understanding of scale itself. "If I asked you to stay," he said without turning back, "not as staff, but as someone who evaluates what others miss, would you refuse?" The question changed the air again. Alicia did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was careful, not uncertain, but measured. "I would need to understand what I am being asked to see," she said. William turned back toward her slowly. For the first time that day, he was not evaluating a deal. He was evaluating a person who had already changed one. And in that quiet space, where contracts no longer mattered and assumptions no longer held weight, something unspoken began to form that neither of them had yet named. The silence that followed William Harrington's last question did not feel empty. It felt full of weight, as if the room itself was waiting for a decision that would redefine everything that had just happened. Alicia Carter remained seated at the edge of the chair, her posture steady, her expression controlled, but there was a subtle shift now. She was no longer simply responding to questions. She was being considered as part of something larger. William stood near the glass wall again, his reflection merging with the city beyond, but his attention was fully inside the room, inside the moment, inside the realization that control was not always where he assumed it to be. He finally spoke without turning. "If you understand what was missed today," he said, "then you also understand how often it is missed elsewhere." Alicia listened, not interrupting. William continued, "My company does not operate on instinct. It operates on structure, review, and repetition. And yet you found what layers of that structure did not." He turned back toward her slowly. "That does not happen by chance." Alicia met his gaze. "It does not," she agreed. The confirmation was simple, but it carried an unspoken depth. William moved closer to the table again, placing one hand lightly on its surface. "Then I need to understand how you see what others do not," he said. Alicia paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Most people are trained to look for confirmation," she said. "I am not trained. I observe without permission." The phrasing landed with clarity that no report or analysis could match. William nodded slowly, as if absorbing a principle that had not been part of his system before. He glanced briefly at the closed contract, then back at her. "You realize what you prevented," he said. Alicia replied calmly, "I only pointed out what was already there." That distinction mattered more than anything else in the room. William stepped back slightly, exhaling as if recalibrating his understanding of scale again. But now the scale was not financial. It was human. "If I were to offer you a position," he said, "not as staff, not as an observer, but as someone who directly evaluates decisions before they move forward, would you consider it?" The question was direct, but it no longer carried the weight of authority alone. Carried uncertainty. Alicia looked down briefly, then back up. "I would consider whether I would be allowed to speak the same way I did today," she said. William did not hesitate. "You would," he replied. The answer was immediate, and it changed the tone of the conversation again. Alicia studied him now not as a client or a stranger, but as someone measuring the sincerity behind the structure being offered. William added quietly, "Because what happened here should not require permission to be heard." The room outside remained still. The executives had long gone. The deal remained unsigned. But inside this quiet space, something else had already taken shape. Not a contract, not a transaction. A recognition that the system William Harrington had built was only as complete as the people it had failed to see. And for the first time, he was no longer trying to control the outcome. He was trying to understand who had already changed it.